people say, yeah, but wait a minute. We come from the most generous nation on earth, the U.S. We're giving foreign aid to all these countries. Really? Let's take a look at that. Here's the giving of developed countries, industrialized countries, as a percent of their GNP to underdeveloped countries. We're probably the high bar there, or the second, right? U.S., surely. Actually, when we reveal the legend for this graph, we find the U.S. is right over here. We're the least generous of the developed countries, as a matter of fact. Giving less than 0.2% to underdeveloped countries. There's nothing to feel too good about there. Even the highest levels give less than 1%. I made that movie a couple of years back, and I was showing it to a friend of mine. Asked what she thought of it. She watched it, and afterwards she said, "Whoa, that made me feel guilty." And, that's really not the point. That's not the point of this teaching, to feel guilty. The point is not to feel guilty. The point is that we are guilty. Or are we? Let's think about what James says and just ask the plain questions. Are we withholding the workman's wages as he charges the evil rich in that passage? One time I was in Indonesia, and we drove past a little river that was so purple, I swear if you stuck your hand in it, it would come out dyed purple. And it was flowing out from a sizable factory there where they made designer blue jeans for export to the West. My friends that were showing me around explained that the average workmen in that factory were earning less than $1 a day, which was considered a good wage in that country. They worked 6 days a week, and their work days were 12 hours long. They were showing up with less than $30 a month. I looked down and realized I'm wearing a pair of those jeans. Most of the products that we buy here in our acquisition thirst, in our lust to possess, are produced under conditions that are really hardly any different than slave labor. If you owned a slave, you'd have to feed him, you'd have to give him a place to live, and you think you could get that done for less than $1 a day? I wonder. And yet, we in the West are just awash in these products, and the companies doing the employing are U.S. owned. We're complicit, we're involved in withholding the workman's wage. I think so. I think it's hard to avoid that conclusion. Are we fattening our hearts in a day of slaughter, as James says? You know what that is? When maybe you've traveled out in the plain states and come across one of these feed yards, the stock lots. They stink for miles away. There's thousands of cattle in these things, in these little corrals. And what they're doing is they're feeding them a rich diet of wheat and sorghum to fatten them up. The cows probably sit in there thinking, this is awesome. Never had food this good before. And they just put them in there for a month or two because we like our beef, nice and fat, greasy. And we fatten them up there for the slaughter. They're getting fattened up for the slaughter. James says, you who are rich are fattening your hearts for the day of slaughter. As we live a lifestyle of self-indulgence and pleasure-seeking, our hearts being fattened just like those cows. And one of the sure signs of a fattened heart is that we have a hardened heart toward the poor. Could we look upon scenes like these, people like these, and feel so little pity that it wouldn't impact us and cause us to do anything about it? That's a fattened heart right there. Have we hoarded wealth in the last days? Well, we've done, I think, exactly that, as a matter of fact. And this really calls attention to the most questionable part of being affluent, which is accumulated wealth. Wealth, here we've lived our luxurious lifestyle, and the fact is that we still have more that we don't even spend, and so we hoard it. And that's considered the American dream. People all over the country are busy building their portfolios so they can be sure and have that huge nest egg. Typically, well over $1 million is the advice that financial counselors give. You know, for any working person today, you've got to save up more than $1 million to be sure that you have decent retirement. That's called hoarding wealth in the last days. Have we lived on the earth in luxury and self-indulgence? Folks, if we have not done this, no one's ever done it. I mean, look around. This is exactly how we live, in luxury and self-indulgence. Well, of course, some of my pictures picked more extreme rich. It's always easier to see the points, although I was careful to include quite a few shots right from Columbus, Ohio, typical houses. You know, you guys could well feel like, look, I'm living on $25 a week, all right, because you're a student. On the other hand, we're all busily preparing for that career, and it's going to bring down the big bucks when it comes. It won't be long before that cash starts rolling in big time. It's the world in which we live. Boy, it's really something to be in some of these cities and to drive for miles through the most desperate kind of poverty, and you just realize, how could a person ever even make it out of this? No one has any money to spend. It's not like you could start a business. If you do start one, you're selling things at pennies on the dollar that it's worth. There's just no way out. And the West, the wealthy countries, are substantially complicit in this state of poverty. Here's another question we could ask ourselves. Have we given sacrificially to help the poor? The whole New Testament teaching of sacrificial love. You know, it's one thing, the rich philanthropist, that's kind of a quandary right there. We think of maybe the wealthiest guy in our town who's said to have $8 billion. He could give $1 million every couple of days, and his balance would never even go down. A lot of people give a little bit of money to something, to some charitable thing, but not enough to make the slightest difference in their lifestyle. You can't tell any difference. And I'm talking here about people in the Christian church. They live the same way everyone else does in America. They got the same homes. They drive the same SUVs. They got the same entertainment centers. Doesn't look like anything's changed. And that is sacrificial giving. We've got people in our own church making 6 figures. Well, they could easily live on half of that, less than half of that. People are living on less than that all around them. And yet they really feel like they're stretching, to the limit, like they're really going the extra mile just to get up to like 5 or 10% giving. That's not sacrificial giving. That's petty bourgeois, self-indulgent living. And it's window dressing. It's a fig leaf to cover our nakedness. That's all it is.